This Social Security measure gives at least some protection
for anybody to hand this out. We're asking for a chance to have the people who will receive the benefit to earn their way. The same principle established under the Social Security system in the 30s.
It is no longer acceptable to discuss women's rights as separate from human rights.
I know we can come together to face down the challenges of our own time.
Hi, we're back. The show is The Democrats, and today we're interviewing the Democratic candidates for state representative from Ward 3. And one of those candidates is my co-host, so I have the pleasure of interviewing my co-host, Cindy Rosenwald. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, David.
Well, nice to see you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I've lived in New Hampshire since 1988, and prior to living in New Hampshire, I worked for a very large advertising agency in New York City. It was actually the world's largest advertising agency. I was a vice president. And then I worked in public relations at Southern New Hampshire Medical Center, went to graduate school at Rivier, and I started teaching college writing down at UMass Lowell for a number of years. So I've had kind of a checkered career path, as we say, but mostly in business and advertising and marketing.
Right. Now, how many terms have you served?
I have just completed my 4th term. I was elected in 2004 first, and I spent 3 terms on the Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs Committee of the House. For 2 of those terms, I was lucky enough to be committee chair. This term, I'm on the Finance Committee, but on the section of it that funds the Health and Human Services program. So I'm still very interested in those policies, but a different aspect of how the state government functions.
So, Cindy, you've served 2 terms in the minority and 2 terms in the majority. This last term was not just, Democrats weren't just a minority, we were in a super minority. Explain to us a little bit how that went and why it's so important to get some more Democratic candidates elected.
Well, my first term, as you point out, I was in the minority, but it was a very different kind of process. It was open government, it was transparent, the public, I think, had a voice. I feel that this past term, the Republican supermajority really shut the public out of the process in several ways. There were unannounced public hearings. There were executive sessions that were not posted, so the public couldn't know that bills were being voted on, even in contradiction of long practice and precedent. There were no Democrats on the budget negotiating committee, only Republicans. Right. What that meant was that every piece of negotiation on the budget could be done in a closed room with no members of the public listening to it. And it was presented to the public finally as a decision that had already been made. Even Republicans on the Finance Committee said to me they thought that was a mistake of their own leadership to shut the minority and therefore the public out of the process.
And I think that's something that the people of the state of New Hampshire expect. We have 400 representatives.
For a reason.
They expect to have transparent, open government.
That's exactly right. And I know when we were in the majority, we were very careful to always publish, as required by House rules, when bills would be heard, when the public had a chance to speak, and when bills would be voted on in committee, which is really equally as important.
Now, Cindy, as a 2-time former chair of Health and Human Services Committee, and really both acknowledged by both parties as really an expert in many of these issues, tell us some of the legislation that you've worked on or that you sponsored that you're most proud of or that's important.
Well, I have worked a lot in the area of public safety in healthcare. So 2 examples are, one, there is a requirement that when something that never should happen in a hospital, and they're called never events, adverse events doesn't really do it justice. Something should never happen. If it does, that must be reported to the Department of Health and Human Services. Right. I was one of the sponsors on that, and believe it or not, these never events do occasionally occur in New Hampshire's hospitals. I also work to expand our required reporting of infections that are acquired in healthcare facilities. We had a requirement
Like what happened in Dover?
Well,
Exeter Hospital.
Exeter.
Exeter.
I think that Exeter could be included in that. The law is really about infections that are acquired by surgical events. I had sponsored a bill to expand that reporting requirement to the ambulatory surgical centers where you would go for day surgery, and there are as many of those in New Hampshire as there are hospitals. So this, I think, definitely improves the healthcare system. More recently, I worked on a finally successful program to monitor prescribing and dispensing of narcotics. This is something that law enforcement's been advocating for, physicians, and really a lot of patients have been too. So that if you walk into your doctor in pain, that physician knows whether it's safe for you to be prescribed a controlled substance. That finally got passed this year, and I'm really happy.
This deals with
about
drug
that.
interaction too, and
Well, it deals really with diversion and abuse more, so that if you're doctor shopping, if you're driving up and down the state from one ER to another, but also means that your physician won't be under-treating you.
Right.
Equally important to over-treating you. So I've worked on some of those. I work a lot in the area of privacy. I believe that federal law does not give individuals enough control over who has access to their medical information and how it's used, in addition to the doctors and nurses that they're actually seeing. That information can be used in surprising ways. So, for example, a couple of years ago, I sponsored a bill to tighten up the marketing exclusion for how your healthcare information can be used. And I sponsored a bill also to say that before your personal health information could be used for fundraising, you had to be given the chance to say, no, thank you. I want treatment from you, but then I don't want to be solicited beyond that. So I think people will be more open with their physicians if they have more confidence that their information is really being only shared with those individuals.
That's
who
great,
need
because
to know.
privacy from federal eyes, I guess, is an issue that you've convinced Democrats to be for, and a lot of people think it's a Republican issue, but it's really
Well, I often work with
Democratic issue.
Republicans on this issue. Believe it, as you know, it's really bipartisan. People in New Hampshire really want to maintain a respectful privacy and distance from maybe Big Brother.
And the show's called The Democrats, and we're about getting Democratic candidates elected, but all the good representatives, all the good lawmakers, and I consider you one of the best.
Thank you.
They reach across the aisle. You have to work with both.
You have to.
I mean, to get anything passed, you need support of both sides. Well, except this last session, because they had 3/4 of the legislature. But I mean, isn't that so important?
It is so important, and even in this past term, I wasn't necessarily successful in these initiatives, but I continued to work with my Republican colleagues on issues of healthcare regulation, for example, on privacy issues. And I think it's really important because there are many people who don't see eye to eye with me on every single issue, but privacy is a bipartisan issue.
Right. We've got to get away from the extremism, back to more moderate, common sense government.
I'm a middle child.
Right. Right. There you go. Always balanced.
That's exactly right.
Now, I know Speaker O'Brien's very controversial, and we're not here to castigate anybody, but he's been making a lot about nepotism lately. Tell us about the history of that,
Well,
because
yes.
you have a kind of a role in that.
When I started reading in the newspaper that Speaker O'Brien was saying New Hampshire had a nepotism problem, I remembered around the margins of my mind that I had done some work on a nepotism bill, and I went back, I researched it, and sure enough, the state's nepotism law, I was the prime sponsor of in 2009. So in all of the years that Republicans led both chambers in New Hampshire, there was never a law against hiring or supervising a close member of your own family. So the fact that New Hampshire has any law in the books about nepotism at all is due to the Democrats. And I was pleased to be the prime sponsor of that bill several years ago.
Well, Cindy, our time is getting short. It's been a pleasure to have you on the other side of the table this time. We do co-host the show together, and the show is called The Democrats, and I've been talking with Cindy Rosenwald, Democratic candidate for state representative in Ward 3.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks, David.
Yep, thank you.